All right, we're going to talk about FM 1 for 1. So basically, lead, in this case blue, is going to be the offending aircraft or the maneuvering aircraft, and green, number 2, is going to be the defending aircraft or the training aircraft. We'll run through this one time, and then we'll talk about what we're looking for as far as the defender, how we're going to maneuver our aircraft to get valid fights on and follow on maneuvering, and then the unwind afterwards. We're going to talk a little bit about where we're looking, what we should see, what we want to do with our aircraft, how we're going to do it with left hand and right hand, and then a couple of the what ifs as far as some of the corrections we need to make, and we'll go on to the post-fight flow.
Phaser, next set, FM 1 for 1. 1's ready? 2's ready. Phaser, check right. Here.
Traffic.
Wi-Fi. 1.7. Lights on. Phase terminate, phaser 1 terminate.
Phase 2 terminate. Traffic.
Phaser reference 240. 2.
All right, so you saw the fight from the setup to the fights on, follow-on maneuvering, and then the post-fight flow. First and foremost, as number 2, you're going to know that FM1 is coming up because you're being a thinking wingman, and that's coming up on the card, or you're going to get that next set FM 1 for 1 call from lead. At that point, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we're in a good tack position, so that 3,000 feet using those normal references. Really what we're going to make sure that we're trying to get to is not so much fore or aft as far as line abreast, but we want to be stack level, close to 200 and close to 11,000 feet, which is going to be our base altitude for the fights. I say I don't necessarily care so much about the fore and aft because what lead is going to do is he's going to check the formation left or right to make sure that you're line abreast so that you don't eat up a lot of gas and time trying to fix the fore and aft. I want 200 knots, I want 11,000 feet, and I want stack level there. Okay. However, we really care about those parameters at fights on. So if you, as 2, think that you can, throughout this setup, throughout the check away, or the check left or right, and then the countdown 2 fights on. If you think that you can fix that stuff in that time, then go ahead and call 2's ready. If not, then go ahead and call 2 standby for, and then airspeed, for example, or altitude. Shouldn't really be a standby line.
Phaser, next set, FM 1 for 1. 2.
In this case, now we're making sure that we are getting close to those parameters that we talked about.
1's ready? 2's ready. Phaser, check right.
All right, so right away we get a check right. What we're going to do is we should be checking close to a 45-degree heading change. I don't want you guys looking at the heading bug and making a perfect 45. I just want a max power, roll to the right, and pull. Make this sort of like a pattern turn, so dragging that TAS antenna across the horizon, or if you got a HUD, a working HUD, go ahead and drag that flight path marker across the horizon as well if you're on altitude. Now, what if we're not? What if we're correcting? In this case, we were high, so you can see in the HUD, I'm allowing that flight path marker to drift slightly below the horizon so that we can get some of the high altitude we started with out of there, all working towards a valid fights on of 200 plus or minus 10 and 11,000 plus or minus 100 feet. There we are, we're close. So I'm bringing that TAS antenna up to the horizon and I'm getting that flight path marker there. What I'm doing now is I've got max power and I've got backstick pressure on the airplane so that I can get a 2 or 3 potato pull roll out, and then start setting up for that turn reversal here. Most of the time this is going to be max power, and it's going to be, you can see about a 2G or 3G pole. That's going to work. If you're in the high MOA, this isn't going to necessarily be the same case. You're going to want to go max power for sure in the high MOA, and then take your time on this turn, because if you go ahead and add backstick pressure, you're adding AOA, you're adding drag, and it's real hard in the T6 to get those knots back to 200. All right, right here is a real important part of the fight. I want you rolling wings level when you've got about close to that 45-degree turn away, okay? Once you roll wings level, here's your turn, your time as the defender to set up for the dynamic cross check that you're going to have to continue through the maneuvering. What I want you doing is, boom, we're wings level. Now I want you twisting in your seat. I don't want you just moving your head and looking left back at lead or the offending aircraft. I want you going and putting your left hip as close to the center of the back of the chair as possible. So you're going to have to kind of scoot forward, twist your hips, and then at the same time, I want you putting your left patch on your shoulder and your left shoulder into the back of the chair as well. So that if your patch is in the back of the chair and you're looking forward, you're kind of looking 45 degrees to the left of the aircraft if you were to center up your head. So from there, we can look 45 degrees to the left at lead, center up your head again, and then we can look 45 degrees to the right at your parameters, airspeed and altitude. Basically what I'm getting at, guys, is I don't want you using just your neck to stare at lead, because we've got to now set that aspect on the turn reversal. At the same time, I want you thinking about what kind of corrections you're going to need to use for your airspeed and altitude. Once you roll wings level, most of the time I stand that PCL straight up. If you keep it at max, you're just going to accelerate, and you're going to have to fix that fast airspeed. So roll wings level, twist yourself in the chair, dig your hip and your patch into the center of the chair, look at lead, and then look at your parameters after standing up your PCL pretty much straight up. The next thing we're going to do is we're waiting for a pure call, or we're waiting to see that the offending aircraft, or the blue aircraft in this case, is pointing straight at us. He doesn't need to call pure. It's just kind of a nicety. If you see that he is pure, shown by you can look right down the intake of his aircraft, then we're going to go ahead and reverse the turn now. So there we got our pure call. What we're going to do is we are going to push that PCL just over the hump, maybe even to max if we're slightly slow, all right? But it's not necessarily going to be standing straight up anymore. We get that pure call. Left hand goes forward, max maybe if you need it, but just make sure that we're kind of holding that 200. We're going to go ahead and roll the aircraft to about a 60-degree bank or so. And then the amount of backstick pressure we're going to apply depends on how much we need to rotate the aircraft to get the 4 to 5 aspect that we are in charge of setting on the offending aircraft. I'll show you what that looks like here.
Traffic.
Now our dynamic cross check is really going to kick in. What we're trying to do is we're trying to set the offending aircraft just forward of the canopy bow, so a few fingers just forward of the canopy bow, and this arm on the left hand side of the seat is pointing straight at the offending aircraft. We're going to set that now with backstick pressure because we're banked up. All right, that's going to be part of that cross check. That's going to be in the aft part of the cross check. Now we're going to look forward, so move our head to the right a little bit, check our parameters. We want to make sure that we're 200 plus or minus 10 and 11,000 plus or minus 100. If one of these parameters, either the aspect doesn't look like this or your airspeed and altitude is off, that's where the better half of your cross check is going to be focused on. Okay, so if I was slow, I'm going PCL forward, right? And I may even have to sacrifice some of this altitude if I have it to get that airspeed back to 200, all right? But about 60% of my cross-check now is going to be set on correcting those parameters. Same thing with this. If I see that he is behind the canopy bow or more towards the tail, I'm going to add some of that backstick pressure, and I'm going to make sure that I'm correcting that as I then look back to make sure these parameters aren't falling out. if he's forward of the canopy bow. That means we need to relax some of that backstick pressure so that we bring the aircraft, the line of sight, back more towards the tail so that we're looking at a picture like this. And now we're just going to hold what we have. He's going to count down. So as soon as you hear 1.7, pretty much hold what you have. If your parameters are off, then get ready to call terminate. I don't want to make a big Hayaka maneuver to try and correct that. But right now, as you can see, we're 198, right at 11,000 feet. We're ready to go. Now we're thinking about what is the kind of brake turn or what is the follow-on maneuvering I'm going to do as the aircraft out in front once he calls fights on. In this case, we're FM 1 for 1, so that means we're going to be pretty much staying level to slightly descending, plus or minus 10. We're going to make sure that we are holding 1 to 2 Gs. Our airspeed is going to be 180 to 220, and our power is going to be cracked to 70 to 85% torque. Technique in this case, just keep what you have, allow the other aircraft to intercept the turn circle, and what I want you doing is to monitor the other aircraft's follow-on maneuvering. So continue that turn. We're watching him trying to intercept the turn circle. We're watching the other aircraft while watching out in front, making sure that we're staying within those parameters. And we should see him bid towards where we're heading. His aspect is going to start to increase as he gets the goal position. All right, now you see the terminate. So what we're going to do is it's going to be pretty much standard for Det 24. The post-fight flow is pretty important here. On terminate, the aircraft out in front, or the defending aircraft, is going to continue the turn, as you can see here. The offending aircraft is going to roll out and is going to use whatever heading he's got and keep the defending aircraft in sight. In this case now, for us, what we're going to do is we're going to roll out after we continue that turn for a little bit, and then we're going to reverse that turn looking over our opposite shoulder. And in this case, he might be kind of more towards the tail. But as we get a right bank and pull, we should be able to kind of see this aircraft on our right side, and that aircraft should be pushing more forward towards our right wing. Our job now is to get the formation position into something that looks about right for tack positioning, so close to that 3,000 feet. Later on in FM2, we're going to require a max power climb at 160 and getting up to 11,000 as fast as possible. In this case, we're already at 11,000 and we're already pretty much close to 200. So our job right now is to get the formation into a good tack position for follow-on fights.
Traffic.
Reference 240.
Now it's just going to be tack formation position maintenance. So that's pretty much it for FM1 as far as the defender. We'll talk about FM1 for the offender, and we'll talk about FM2 offender and defender as well. Let me know if this is helpful, and we'll keep these videos going.